Hi, I'm Dr. Nancy Lonsdorf, the author of The Healthy Brain Solution for Women Over 40 and founder of My Ageless Brain Game, an online course to enhance cognitive function. And today I'd like to talk with you about the brain and emotion, particularly stressful emotion that may be stronger than we really want it to be. And certainly it seems like today there's so many things that can trigger our emotions and cause us to feel maybe uncomfortably strong emotions that we would just as soon have more in the background. So I wanted to share some insights from brain research. For we actually can't just change by will what emotion we feel, because by the time we feel the emotion, it's already there. So while there are methodologies to change how we feel about something emotionally, it does take processing. It takes a structured conversation or a process that we go through cognitively, and it takes some time. So I want to share with you what we can do once the emotion's already popped up and we just want it to calm down so we can focus on what we really want to be focusing on. So I'd like to share this brain research with you that I think is extremely empowering and very fascinating. And I'm hoping that it will give you some practical value in your daily life today. All right, so let's start out by looking at some slides. All right. I think we all know that stress impairs executive functioning. Well, we may not think of ourselves as an executive unless we're running a corporation, but executive functioning here means just our ability to use our mind for what we want at the time we want to use it. And here are two aspects of executive functioning in our mind and brain and how stress can impair that. So first of all, we have working memory. We have the information we can kind of hold in mind at one time while we're working on something. Maybe we're writing a book and we're thinking about many different bits of information and creatively putting them together. And we kind of have to hold all that in our mind at one time, or we're working on some computer program and we're having to keep a lot of things in mind. Or just something simple like we have to hold a phone number in mind while we're entering it into our contact list. So it's like our mental desktop. It's what we have available to us right at this moment. And if we're feeling stressed, we really can't remember things as clearly or well or as much at one time. This function gets impaired. The second thing that tends to get impaired is cognitive flexibility, which is just a fancy term for our ability to think on our feet and our ability to react and adapt to something that's changing suddenly in our environment, whether it's all of a sudden on the computer, some pop-up comes and we have to interrupt ourselves to get rid of that, or somebody knocks on our door, comes by our desk and starts talking to us in the middle of something we're focused on, is that ability to kind of shift to the new stimulus, take care of it, shift back with the least amount of interruption of focus and, may I add, the least amount of additional stress that we might experience because of that interruption. So the more we can keep stress and emotional stress calm within our system, the better we can focus on and achieve what we really want to be doing. I wanted to mention this very fascinating piece of research because some people are in the habit, or personality-wise, they've just found this works for them, or they grew up in an environment where emotions were suppressed and they just do it automatically. They don't even know they're doing it. Or maybe later they might reflect, or they talk to their therapist or some friend and they say, you know, my boss really made me mad when she told me this or he told me that. And, you know, your friend might say, well, what did you do? And you can go, well, nothing. I just pretended like it didn't bother me, and I just tried to act appropriately and remove myself as soon as I could from the situation. But the thing is, it turns out that consistent emotional suppression has a price, not only for us as a person, but as a physical body. It can be bad for our physical health. It turns out that research has shown in situations where somebody suppresses their emotional response, actively suppresses, they actually have an increased blood pressure response. So they think that they're just holding it, but it's actually causing a pressure inside, a physical pressure, and their blood pressure is going up, which obviously is not a good thing, and can, over time, over the decades, with that habit, blood pressure going up and possibly, heart damage and strokes and all of those things we all want to avoid. So it also has a direct impact on that relationship. Maybe it's better, probably it's better than just like yelling back at the boss. You might immediately get fired. But on the other hand, it doesn't lead to a closer relationship or better communication in the future or greater rapport with that person. And it actively inhibits that from happening. So that was discovered through research. And it was a bit counterintuitive. You might think, well, somebody's just, suppressing it, so the other person thinks they're nice and calm, and they actually get along better and their relationship develops. But no, it actually is not a good way to develop greater rapport and to communicate better or to have a better relationship. So what can we do if we're not just suppressing it, and we obviously don't want to just let it out at will? What is another way we can deal with it? And not just at the moment, but, often we bring these things home with us, or maybe it happens at home and we bring it with us 24/7, or it keeps us from falling asleep, or we wake up in the middle of the night stewing about something. And that, again, has ripple effects on our other relationships, and, sleep deprivation and all of that adds to the physiological impact. So let's look at a very fascinating alternative. Okay, are any of you phobic of snakes? Well, snakes are not usually most people's favorite animal. I would say there are people who tolerate it, and a very, very, very small percentage who like to wrap them around their necks and such. But for most people, snakes are not a pleasant sight, and we sort of have an inborn, intuitive, like survival instinct response to snakes that seems to be almost hardwired. Somehow our subconscious mind seems to recognize that as an animal that can be a danger to us. So it wants us to stay away. So in this experiment, which was using MRI, the magnetic resonance imaging of the brain, to look at what parts are active at what times in relation to the experiment, and a functional MRI with people, clinical means with humans. And what they did was look at what's happening in the brain when the person is looking at the snake, of course, versus looking at some neutral stimuli, which they compared it to in the study. So it was controlled, and they looked at what responds in the brain specific to something that is inciting fear or upset or disgust or whatever in that person who is viewing the picture. And then they took the person through a couple cognitive exercises. So let's see what happens in this experiment. Well, when the people looked at the picture of the snake, what happened in their brain? Well, our good friend, the amygdala, lights up, meaning blood flow starts spurting to that area and the metabolism increases, and it usually means that some emotional experience is happening in that person. Usually a negative one, but it can be associated with pleasure. But in this case, fear or anger are more likely the emotions that are going on. So, okay, so look at the snake, get your amygdala all riled up. So we might think, well, how can we shift that? Because this state is one in which the person's feeling, really uncomfortable, like really strong anxiety, fear, disgust, revolting sensation. So, well, before we address what we can do with the brain, let's just look at a schematic. When we get under stress, say the amygdala, which is deep inside this part of the brain called the temporal lobe, it's on the inside of that. This is a fold. It's like this part of the brain is attached to this one. And in that junction point, that's kind of deep in here, the amygdala lies and is getting all activated. And when that happens, then this part of the brain tends to get really calm. Like the blood flow is going to the amygdala to get the body and the mind all riled up and alerted that some danger is here. And to the cost of our prefrontal cortex, our kind of CEO, remember, executive function, we are basically that part of our brain's like our CEO of us and our attention, because it kind of runs it on the surface, and it governs our attention, our planning, our impulse control, organizing, and moral reasoning, all those things that you don't really need when you've got to run away from a snake or a dangerous object. So our brilliant brain automatically prioritizes the amygdala and its activation, and basically calms down this part of the brain. So what's the solution? Because if we're in everyday work situation or doing some task at home or trying to pay attention to something, and we start feeling this really strong emotion that, let's face it, most of the time that we feel strong anxiety or fear in modern life is because our survival instinct is, well, we could say sort of inappropriately graded as too active. We are too survival responding, to the traffic or to a picture of a snake. It's not even the snake itself, and yet we're responding. So we want to tone that down at times, and maybe we don't really know how to do that, or it would be too time consuming, to call your best friend or your therapist and have them talk you down. It's not really practical. So here is what the researchers studied. They studied a process simply called name your emotion, but the official psychological term is affective or affect labeling, meaning you take your attention and put it on yourself and you say, what emotion am I feeling? And you name the emotion. That's how simple it is. Affect is sort of a fancy word related to emotion. So when that person in the MRI sees the snake and their amygdala gets all activated and upset, and they say, the researcher may ask them, okay, what emotion are you feeling? And the person might just say terror or fear. Just doing that causes less amygdala activation. It means the amygdala becomes less active, and it causes the prefrontal cortex to become more active. Remember, we were talking about how the prefrontal cortex and its activity kind of dampens down and when the amygdala is very active. So we can reverse that. We consciously apply something that requires our prefrontal cortex to work, like, okay, what word encapsulates the emotion I'm feeling right now? that cognitive process gets that part of the brain active. And thankfully, along with it, at the same time, the amygdala becomes less active. So we feel less anxious. We feel less fearful. So it's kind of counterintuitive. Some people think, well, I don't want to talk about how I feel because if I do, it's like they have some fear is going to get out of control. So here you are. We have scientific research that shows that actually just putting a name to that emotion will calm it down. Here's some schematics of the fMRI of the naming process. And what this shows is in red, the areas that become more active when the person puts the name to the emotion, and in the blue, the areas that become less active. So I'll spare you all the details of this. You see lots of arrows and lots of acronyms here. But what we have here basically is that with naming, you see these on the top, you've got the kind of looking at the brain on the two sides from the outside. And then below, you have looking at it as if you cut the head in half, and we're looking at the inside of both halves. So the inside is where the amygdala lives, and you see it turns blue, like cold. It becomes less active, there's less blood flow, there's less metabolic activity. But what becomes more active is on the outsides here in the prefrontal regions. You've got a whole lot more activity showing up once the person names it. So we have that inverse relation. The prefrontal cortex gets more active and the amygdala calms down. So we've got an amygdala on both sides of our brain because we have two temporal lobes, got one on the right, one on the left. So this is looking at the two. It's a little bit of extra research detail, but interestingly, you see when the person is just looking at the snake on the left amygdala and the right, they're about the same. We have a 0.3 parameter estimate. Just think of, okay, there's 0.3 activity. And then when they label the emotion, look, the left amygdala goes down to probably a quarter or less of the activation. The right amygdala doesn't go down quite as much. We often think of the right side of the brain as being kind of more related to emotion. Maybe that has to do with it, but it still declines by at least a third, a little more than a third. Now, there's another word here called reappraise. Reappraise. And you see that reappraise condition also lowers amygdala activity, about the same on the right and not quite as much on the left. So let's consider that. What does reappraise mean? Reappraise means that in that experimental condition, the researchers asked the participants to think about the snake in ways that made the snake for them less threatening. So people would, during that part of the exercise, they might think or say, well, look, it looks like a small snake. It's really, I don't even know if it's poisonous snake. It's just sitting there. It has interesting scales on it, an interesting pattern on its skin. So they take their mind, partly distracting and partly kind of talking themselves out of it being dangerous. Well, that actually also has an effect, whether they convince their amygdala or their deeper emotional response that it's really not dangerous or not, it does have an effect on calming the amygdala. And in that previous slide, these were also what happened with the prefrontal cortex getting more active and the amygdala becoming less active as a result of this reappraisal exercise. So it works for both of those. I would say when you're in the middle of some experience that you immediately want to dampen down that emotional response, just reflect and go, fear, terror, or anger, or whatever the emotion is, just name it and you'll feel better. So, and actually, when the participants were asked to report their level of unpleasant feeling, whatever it was, whatever unpleasant emotion they were feeling, when they were asked cognitively and consciously to report what they felt, they actually reported greater results and calmness that they felt from the reappraisal, that particular exercise. And I wanted to share one other study. It was a fascinating study that was done in the early 1990s, but is still certainly relevant to today. And this was a writing exercise that was done with about 60 people, 63 professionals who had recently lost their job in a big company due to a layoff. And these recently unemployed professionals had a lot of emotions about that layoff, what they were feeling from it, the impact it had on their life, their relationships, their income, their search for the next job and their career, et cetera, et cetera. So this particular researcher and his colleagues, Dr. Pennebaker is usually the one quoted here, found in this study and in some successive analysis of this work that those people in the group, there were about 20 that were told to write about their experience and explore as deeply as possible their emotions, feelings, and thoughts about what had happened to them with the layoff. And they were to write nonstop for about 30 minutes every day for 5 days in a row. That's it. Then the next group was asked to reflect on non-traumatic aspects, not their feelings, not anything emotional, and just write about it. And then there was a third group that simply took the questionnaires and did not do any writing exercise. So what they found was that those people who did the writing exercise actually started to get reemployed much faster than the group that was not doing the writing exercise. And so this was supposed to be a 1-year experiment. They actually ended it in 4 months because those who did the writing exercise for just those 5 days were getting hired so much faster than everybody else. So they wanted to give everybody else in the study the opportunity to do the 5-day writing exercise with their supervision. So that was all interesting. But what was also really interesting was when they went back and analyzed the content of those writing exercises, they found that the people who got the most resolved about it and felt like it was more like a thing of the past, or that their emotions were pretty much just resolved, they were the ones whose content of writing, interestingly, contained the most words such as realized, had the insight, came to the conclusion. Now, those are cognitive related words. They have to do with the processing up here, right? In the prefrontal cortex. It's thinking about things and analyzing and coming to conclusions and looking at a broad perspective, perhaps, as opposed to just the emotional words. The number of emotional words and their intensity did not correlate with the degree of resolution that the person felt about the experience. So again, just diving into the emotion and maybe looking at it, the emotion, doesn't necessarily cause it to dissipate about a particular experience, but delving into the experience in a very deep way, not setting the emotions aside, because they were asked to, you know, delve deeply into their emotions, feelings, and thoughts about it. But it just happened to be that in that process, those people who came to conclusions and insights and realizations actually got the most emotional resolution. So I think that's a very important and powerful lesson for all of us, that just emoting or sharing our emotions over and over, I think many of us have had that experience of something was very disturbing. We may feel better at the moment, but it doesn't really resolve us in a lasting way. But going through a more detailed process that leads to new insights and new perspectives can free us from that emotional load that we're carrying. So we'll go into this more and more. I think it's an extremely important topic. Probably much of the emotional angst that many people feel today, and you can hardly, avoid feeling when you read the news this way or that thing, or, there's something, it seems, that's kind of stirring the emotions right and left today. I think that we could all benefit from studying more. What are the scientific and proven and evidenced ways that we can help modulate and resolve our emotions? And that, for people who just value being calm, cool, collected, it's a benefit. And those who are spiritually oriented and just want to live their best life and be their best person, it's also a gift to see and feel that old baggage drop away in a very real way. Not that we're suppressing it, not that we are trying to talk ourselves out of it, but that we've really truly processed it in a brain proven way that has allowed it to just dissipate. It's just no longer an issue. All right, so until next time, have a great week, and I wish you emotional peace and happiness to the degree we can feel happiness. As much as, one thing may make us happy and the next minute we have another challenge, but, evenness. I like the term equanimity, and the word equanimous just sounds like a smooth surface of a pond. May you enjoy, if not suppressing the waves as they may come up, but that they settle down and you enjoy that background of inner peace. So be sure to click the link below and download the PDF that I put together for you to make this exercise super simple for you to do on your own. If you find that you're taking something home with you, or it's recycling in your head about an incident or something that's emotionally bothering you, just pull out this sheet and spend a few minutes writing on that, naming your emotion and doing the little reappraisal exercise. And then let me know how you do. I'll send you a short survey and you can report how it went for you. All right, take care. Bye for now. Wishing you a peaceful, equanimous week.